The night the vow was broken, the wind carried it across the plains like a warning. Long before dawn, before the coyotes cried or the horses stirred, something ancient shifted in the land. Honor, once as solid as stone, began to crack. And love, quiet but stubborn, waited for its moment to step through. But this is not just a tale of the Old West. It is a story of blood-bound promises, of a heart raised to serve duty before desire, and of a man who believed freedom was something other people deserved. From the very first breath of his life, he was taught that honor was heavier than happiness, that a warrior's path was chosen, not questioned, that love was a weakness best left buried beneath scars and silence. If you enjoy deep, emotional Western love stories, stories where fate and passion collide under wide American skies, then you are in the right place. This story is brought to you by Western Love Story, where honor, sacrifice, and forbidden love meet. Before the fire burns any brighter, take a moment to like this story and subscribe to the channel, because the journey ahead is long, intense, and unforgettable. He stood alone at the edge of the camp, a muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry, always shirtless, with a fit. Model-like muscular build, small tribal tattoos, and tribal jewelry around his neck. The firelight danced across his skin, tracing old scars earned in battles no one spoke about anymore. His long black hair was tied back with leather, moving gently as the night wind passed through. To his people, he was strength. To his elders, he was obedience. To himself, he was a man who had never been allowed to choose. His name was Hawk of the Iron Plains, a name earned through courage and sealed by blood. From the time he could walk, he was trained to protect, to fight, to stand unbroken. The elders said his spirit was forged for leadership, but leadership came with chains. He was bound by honor to a vow made before he even understood its meaning. A promise to defend tribal lands at all costs, to never abandon his duty, and to marry only for alliance, never for love. Beyond the circle of firelight, the old American frontier stretched wide and unforgiving. Wooden settlements sat like fragile promises against endless plains. Cowboys passed through native lands with uneasy respect. Soldiers marched roads carved into sacred ground. It was a time when survival demanded hard choices, and soft hearts rarely survived. On the other side of the river lived the people who had once been enemies, now uneasy neighbors. Among them was a young native woman known as Mourning Willow. She wore traditional native clothing stitched by her own hands, soft leather dresses adorned with beads, feathers woven into her dark hair, moccasins quiet against the earth. Her beauty was not loud, but it lingered, like the calm after rain. She carried herself with quiet strength, eyes sharp with understanding, lips shaped by patience and restraint. Mourning Willow was not meant to cross paths with Hawk of the Iron Plains. Their tribes had history written in loss and mistrust, yet fate has never cared much for rules. Their first meeting happened by accident, or so it seemed. A wounded horse, a shared silence, a moment where two souls recognized something familiar in each other. He saw her standing by the riverbank at sunrise, mist curling around her like a veil. The world felt different then, lighter, dangerous. For the first time, the muscular Native American warrior, with long black hair and tribal jewelry, felt something stir that had nothing to do with battle. It frightened him more than any enemy ever had. They spoke little at first. Words were risky. Glances were safer. Every meeting was brief, stolen between duties and expectations. Yet each time the pull grew stronger. He began to question the stories he had been told. She began to see the man beneath the warrior. But honor is not easily escaped. Hawk of the Iron Plains carried his vow like a shadow. The elders were watching. The tribe needed him. A treaty was fragile. Any wrong step could bring war back to their lands. Loving her was not just forbidden. The old American world around them pressed in. Soldiers began building a fort nearby. Settlers demanded more land. Tribal councils met in hushed tones, preparing for conflict. Hawk was chosen to lead the warriors if blood was spilled. His future was being decided without him, just as it always had been. At night, he stood beneath the stars, a muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry. Always shirtless, his chest rising with heavy breaths as he wrestled with thoughts he had never been allowed to have. Could honor exist without sacrifice? Could duty survive love? Or was love the very thing that would destroy everything he had sworn to protect? Morning Willow felt the weight too. She knew what loving him meant. She knew the cost. Still, when she saw him, when their hands brushed by accident, when his voice softened just for her, she wondered if some paths were worth walking, no matter how sharp the stones. This is where the story truly begins. In the space between tradition and desire, in the silence between heartbeats, in a land where freedom was promised to some and denied to others. As the sun rose higher over the plains, Hawk of the Iron Plains received a message that would change everything. A command from the elders, a reminder of his vow, a choice that could not be delayed any longer. Honor was calling him back, love was pulling him forward, and the path he chose would set fire to both worlds. The question was no longer whether he could keep his promise. It was whether breaking it was the only way to finally be free. The message from the elders burned in his thoughts long after the runner disappeared into the dust. Hawk of the Iron Plains remained where he was, muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry, always shirtless, with a fit, model-like muscular build, small tribal tattoos and tribal jewelry around his neck. His jaw tightened as he stared toward the distant hills, where the land rolled like a restless sea. The command was simple in words but heavy in meaning. He was to attend the council fire at moonrise. No delay, no questions. Council fires were never called without reason. In the old American frontier, every gathering of elders meant decisions that shaped lives and ended others. Hawk knew this better than most. He'd grown up listening from the shadows as men older than the hills spoke of warpaths, broken treaties, and promises sealed with blood. Honor was not a word in his tribe. It was law. As he walked back through the camp, children paused their games to watch him pass. Women lowered their voices. Warriors nodded with quiet respect. To them, he was already the future chief, the shield that would stand between their people and the advancing world. None of them saw the weight pressing against his chest. None of them knew that the strongest battle he faced was one no blade could solve. His past followed him like a second shadow. He remembered his father, Stone Bear, a warrior who had fallen protecting the river crossing years ago. The elders often spoke of that night, how Stone Bear held the line while others escaped. Hawk had been a boy then, hiding behind his mother's dress, watching the firelight reflect off blood and steel. From that moment, his path was sealed. He would live as his father lived, and if needed, die the same way. Across the river, Morning Willow felt the shift in the air as well. She had learned to read signs the way others read books. The birds had grown restless. The wind carried sharp whispers. She stood outside her family's lodge, dressed in traditional native clothing, soft leather hugging her frame, beadwork catching the light, her dark hair braided with feathers that spoke of her lineage. Her people called her wise beyond her years, but wisdom did not protect the heart. She had seen Hawk of the Iron Plains earlier that morning, standing alone near the ridge. Even from a distance, there was no mistaking him. The muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry carried himself like a storm held in human form. She sensed trouble in the way he stood, shoulders tense, gaze fixed on nothing and everything at once. Morning Willow had her own burdens. Her tribe walked a thin line between survival and surrender. The settlers pressed closer each season, their fences cutting into grazing land, their laws written without native voices. Some among her people believed peace was still possible. Others sharpened their blades in secret. Morning Willow stood between these worlds, carrying messages, offering counsel, trying to keep blood from soaking the earth again. Her connection to Hawk was a secret neither could afford. Their meetings were brief, always cautious. A shared drink at the river, a few quiet words exchanged while gathering herbs, yet each moment stayed with her, lingering long after they parted. She saw the man beneath the warrior, the doubt behind the strength, that frightened her more than his scars. As moonrise approached, Hawk prepared himself in silence. He washed in the cold stream, the water running over his skin, tracing the small, tribal tattoos that marked his victories and his vows. He tied his hair back with care, adjusting the tribal jewelry around his neck, symbols of loyalty and rank. Each piece felt heavier than before. The council fire was already burning when he arrived. Elders sat in a wide circle, their faces lined by time and responsibility. At the center stood Raven Speaker, the oldest among them, his eyes sharp despite his years. Silence fell as Hawk stepped forward. The crackle of fire was the only sound. They spoke of the fort being built closer to their hunting grounds, soldiers mapping the land, of settlers demanding protection under laws that did not belong to this soil. They spoke of betrayal disguised as progress. Then they spoke of Hawk. He was to lead a scouting party at first light. He was to prepare for the possibility of war. And when the time came, he was to seal an alliance through marriage, strengthening bonds between tribes before blood was spilled. The word struck harder than any blow. Hawk listened without interruption. That was his way. But inside, something twisted painfully. The vow he carried had always been distant, a future sacrifice waiting its turn. Now it stood before him, demanding obedience. Across the plains, Morning Willow knelt beside her grandmother, listening to stories older than memory. Stories of love lost to duty, of warriors who chose honor and paid the price in loneliness. The old woman's voice trembled as she spoke, and Morning Willow wondered if the stories were warnings or mirrors. That night, Hawk stood once more beneath the stars, a muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry. Always shirtless, his fit, model-like muscular build, outlined against the firelight. He felt the land breathing around him, ancient and patient. The land had seen countless men bound by honor. It had also seen those who dared to break free. He thought of Morning Willow, of her quiet strength, of the way she listened more than she spoke, the future that flickered in his mind whenever he allowed himself to imagine something beyond duty. Each thought was a risk, each memory a crack in the armor he had worn all his life. In the distance, a wolf howled. The sound carried across the plains, lonely and defiant. Hawk understood that call. It echoed his own heart, torn between the safety of the pack and the pull of something unknown. As dawn crept closer, both Hawk of the Iron Plains and Morning Willow sensed that the world they knew was shifting. Forces beyond them were moving pieces on a board stained by history. Love had entered a place ruled by honor, and neither would emerge unchanged. The path ahead remained hidden, wrapped in shadow and uncertainty. And with each passing moment, the cost of choice grew heavier. Dawn broke with a pale light that felt unsure of itself, as if even the sun hesitated to rise over what was coming. Hawk of the Iron Plains mounted his horse without ceremony, a muscular Native American. Warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry, always shirtless, with a fit. Model-like, muscular build, small tribal tattoos, and tribal jewelry around his neck. The leather reins creaked in his grip as he led the scouting party toward the northern ridge. Behind him rode warriors who trusted him with their lives, men who believed his strength and honor were unshakable. As they moved across the plains, Hawk felt the weight of every step. The land was familiar, yet changed. The tracks cut deeper than before. Trees bore marks of axes not made by native hands. The old American frontier was closing in, reshaping itself without asking permission. Hawk studied every sign with sharp focus, but his thoughts kept drifting to Morning Willow and the Council Fire's words that still echoed in his chest. Across the river, Morning Willow began her own day with careful calm. She wore her traditional native clothing, a soft earth-tone dress decorated with beadwork that told the story of her family. Her moccasins brushed the ground silently as she walked among her people, offering quiet guidance where she could. She listened to worries spoken in low voices, to fears that had no clear answers. Every conversation circled back to the same truth. Change was coming, and not everyone would survive it. She tried to keep her thoughts steady, but Hawk of the Iron Plains lingered in her mind. She had sensed distance in him the last time they met, a storm held tightly behind his eyes. Morning Willow understood distance. It was how people protected themselves when choices became dangerous. Still, she feared what that distance might become. On the ridge, Hawk dismounted and raised a hand, signaling silence. Before them, smoke curled faintly into the sky. A temporary camp. Soldiers, by the look of it. Ooh. He studied the scene carefully. The muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry crouched low. His fit, model-like, muscular build tense and ready. This was not just a threat to land, it was a message. The world beyond the plains was no longer content to stay beyond them. One of the younger warriors whispered that they should strike first, send a warning. Hawk shook his head. Blood spilled too early, only brought more blood later. Yet as he watched soldiers move freely across ground once sacred, he felt the pull of anger tightening inside him. Honor demanded patience. Survival demanded strength. Love demanded something else entirely. That evening, Hawk slipped away from the camp alone. He crossed the river at a narrow bend, known only to those raised on these lands. When he reached the far bank, he saw Morning Willow waiting beneath a cottonwood tree. She had felt him coming, the way some hearts recognize familiar footsteps before they are heard. They stood facing each other in silence. The air between them felt heavy with things unsaid. Hawk of the Iron Plains, a muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry, always shirtless, met her gaze. Morning Willow's traditional native clothing stirred softly in the breeze, feathers in her hair catching the last light of day. He spoke first, telling her of the soldiers, of the elders' plans, of the alliance marriage that loomed closer than ever. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. Morning Willow listened, her expression calm, though her heart raced. She had expected this moment, yet it still felt unreal. She told him of her own people's fears, of whispers that some were willing to surrender land to avoid war, of others who believed resistance was the only path left. She did not ask him to choose. She knew better. Choice was already tearing him apart. When they parted, there was no promise made, no solution found. Only a shared understanding that whatever came next would test them beyond endurance. Back at the camp, Hawk found Ravenspeaker waiting by the fire. The elder's gaze was sharp, as if he could see straight through flesh and bone into the turmoil beneath. He spoke of destiny, of how some are born to carry burdens heavier than others. He reminded Hawk of Stone Bear, of sacrifices that shaped their people's survival. Hawk listened in silence, the muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry standing tall, though his chest felt tight. Ravenspeaker warned him that divided hearts made weak leaders. Hawk said nothing, but the warning struck deep. Meanwhile, Morning Willow faced her own challenge. Thunder Elk, a respected warrior from her tribe, approached her with concern, masked as duty. He spoke of alliances, of the dangers of trusting outsiders, even those born of native blood, but bound to different vows. His eyes lingered with suspicion when he mentioned Hawk of the Iron Plains. Morning Willow held her ground, but she felt the walls closing in. Days passed, each heavier than the last. Hawk led more patrols, each revealing deeper encroachment. Morning Willow worked to ease tensions among her people, her traditional native clothing marking her as a bridge between past and present. Both moved through their roles with care, yet the space between duty and desire narrowed dangerously. At night, Hawk lay awake staring at the stars, his muscular frame still, his mind restless. The tribal jewelry around his neck felt like chains. He wondered how many before him had faced this same crossroad, how many had chosen honor and lived with regret. He wondered if love could ever exist without destroying something else. Morning Willow dreamed of open plains untouched by fences, of hands joined without fear. She woke each morning knowing dreams alone could not change reality. The land watched them both, silent, patient. The old American frontier had seen countless struggles, countless hearts broken by forces larger than themselves. As tensions rose and alliances threatened to reshape lives, Hawk of the Iron Plains and Morning Willow stood at the center of a storm that had only begun to gather. Nothing had been decided. Nothing had been resolved. And with every passing day, the cost of waiting grew more dangerous. The days that followed felt stretched thin, like a bow pulled too far back. Hawk of the Iron Plains moved through them with careful control, a muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry. Always shirtless, with a fit, model-like muscular build, small tribal tattoos and tribal jewelry around his neck. Every eye in the camp watched him now. The elders watched, the warriors watched. Even the land seemed to watch, waiting to see which way he would turn. Scouts returned with troubling news. More soldiers. More wagons. More wooden posts driven into soil that still remembered sacred footsteps. The old American frontier was tightening like a noose. Hawk stood before the council fire again, listening as plans were spoken with sharp certainty. Defensive lines, strategic alliances, preparations for conflict that no one dared to name openly. The marriage was mentioned again, this time without softness. It was to happen soon. The alliance would secure warriors, strengthen borders, send a clear message of unity. Hawk did not argue. His silence was mistaken for acceptance, but inside, something dangerous was growing. Honor demanded obedience, yet every breath felt heavier than the last. Across the river, Morning Willow sensed the shift as well. Her people gathered more often, voices tense, faces drawn tight with worry. She moved among them in her traditional native clothing, beadwork glinting softly, feathers braided into her dark hair. Children clung to her when fear crept too close. Elders asked her thoughts, trusting her calm spirit. Still, she felt powerless against the larger tide pulling them all forward. Thunder Elk's presence became more constant. He spoke of protection, of strength through unity, of sacrifices made for survival. His words carried weight, and Morning Willow understood his concern. Yet every time Hawk of the Iron Plains crossed her mind, her heart resisted the paths being laid before her. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the plains in firelight, Hawk crossed the river again. He knew the risk. He accepted it. The muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry moved like a shadow through tall grass. His fit, model-like, muscular build, built for both battle and silence. Morning Willow was waiting near the cottonwood once more. She had felt him coming, the way the earth seems to know when rain is near. When their eyes met, the tension between them felt sharper than any blade. They spoke quietly, urgently. Hawk told her the marriage was being set into motion. Morning Willow told him her people were preparing for the worst. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. The old American plains, the distant cries of night birds, the weight of generations pressing in. Hawk of the Iron Plains reached for her hand, then stopped himself. Honor held him back even now. Morning Willow did not step away. She spoke softly, not of rebellion, not of escape, but of truth. She told him that a heart forced into silence eventually breaks, that leadership born only of obedience leaves no room for hope. Her words stayed with him long after he returned to his camp. Tension rose quickly after that. Skirmish nearly broke out when soldiers strayed too close to a hunting party. No blood was spilled, but the message was clear. Patience was running out. The elders demanded readiness. Hawk trained the warriors harder than ever, his commands sharp, his movements precise. He was the image of strength, a muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry, always shirtless, scars and tattoos marking his skin like a living history. At night, he found no rest. The tribal jewelry around his neck felt like a judgment. He thought of Stone Bear, of the honor passed down to him like an inheritance that could not be refused. He wondered if his father had ever stood where he stood now, torn between duty and something dangerously close to happiness. Morning Willow faced her own trial. Her grandmother fell ill, weakening quickly. As Morning Willow cared for her, the old woman spoke in fragments of the past, of love chosen and love denied, of mistakes and quiet victories. She took Morning Willow's hand and told her that sometimes the bravest act is not to fight, but to speak when silence is expected. The words settled deep in Morning Willow's heart. The night before the alliance announcement, the air felt charged. Fires burned lower. Conversations hushed when Hawk passed by. Raven Speaker watched him closely, sensing unrest beneath the warrior's calm exterior. Hawk of the Iron Plains felt the moment closing in, the choice he had avoided standing directly before him. He walked alone to the ridge overlooking both lands. From there, he could see the faint lights of Morning Willow's camp across the river and the glow of his own people's fires behind him. Two worlds, one heart. He removed the tribal jewelry from his neck and held it in his hands. Each piece represented loyalty, sacrifice, protection. None represented joy. The muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry felt exposed without it, yet strangely lighter. Below, movement caught his eye. Riders approaching. Too fast, too many. Alarm rose in his chest. This was not the planned time. Something was happening. Across the river, Morning Willow heard the distant thunder of hooves. Her people stirred, fear rippling through the camp. Thunder Elk moved to organize defenses. Morning Willow's heart pounded as she looked toward the ridge, searching for a familiar silhouette. Hawk of the Iron Plains did not hesitate. Whatever was coming would not wait for council decisions or alliances sealed by marriage. He tightened his grip on his weapon, muscles tense, instinct sharp. Honor demanded he protect his people.
Love
demanded he protect something more fragile, more rare. As the first warning calls echoed across the plains, Hawk knew that by sunrise, everything would change. The vow that had bound him all his life stood against the truth rising in his chest. And somewhere between duty and desire, between war and peace, his true path waited to be chosen. The storm had reached its edge. The riders slowed before reaching the camps, their raised hands signaling caution rather than attack. Hawk of the Iron Plains stood firm on the ridge, a muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry, always shirtless, with a fit model-like muscular build, small tribal tattoos, and tribal jewelry around his neck restored once more. Moonlight brushed his shoulders as he watched the figures dismount. They were not soldiers. They were messengers from neighboring tribes, faces drawn with urgency rather than threat. Raven Speaker arrived beside him, breath steady despite the climb. Words were exchanged quickly. The messengers brought news that shifted everything. The fort commander had overstepped, pushing settlers into sacred ground without approval from higher command. Pressure from other tribes and traders had reached distant offices. A meeting had been demanded. Pause. A chance to speak before blood decided the future. Relief moved through the camp like a quiet wave, but tension still lingered. A pause did not mean peace. Hawk understood this better than anyone, yet for the first time the path ahead held more than one ending. Across the river, Morning Willow watched torches flicker without turning to flames. Her heart slowed as the warning calls softened. She moved through her people in traditional native clothing, beadwork catching the light, feathers steady in her hair. Thunder Elk met her gaze and nodded once. Whatever came next would require wisdom as much as strength. At dawn, leaders from multiple tribes gathered near the riverbank. The old American frontier held its breath. Hawk of the Iron Plains stepped forward when called. The muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry standing tall, scars and tattoos telling his story without words. Morning Willow stood among her people, her presence calm and grounded. Hawk spoke plainly. He spoke of land remembered by generations, of treaties bent and promises ignored, of a future where survival did not have to mean surrender. His voice carried across the water, steady and clear. Raven Speaker added history. Morning Willow added hope. Thunder Elk added resolve. Together, their words formed something stronger than any single vow. The meeting ended with agreement. Boundaries would be respected. Talks would continue. The fort would halt expansion. It was not victory, but it was peace enough to breathe. That evening the elders called Hawk before the fire one last time. Raven Speaker studied him for a long moment. He spoke of Stone Bear, of honor that protects life rather than denies it. He said that vows made without choice grow brittle with time. He released Hawk from the alliance marriage, not as weakness, but as recognition that true leadership listens to the land and the heart. Hawk felt the weight lift. The muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry bowed his head, gratitude and resolve settling together. Honor had not been broken, it had been reshaped. When Hawk crossed the river at sunset, Morning Willow was waiting. She wore traditional native clothing stitched in colors of earth and sky, her presence steady as the cottonwood behind her. They stood facing each other as they had so many times. But this moment felt different, open, unburdened. Hawk spoke first, his voice low and honest. He spoke of fear and duty, of a life lived for others, of a future he wanted to choose. Morning Willow listened, then stepped closer. She spoke of patience, of courage, of love that does not demand but invites. Their hands met, not in secrecy, but in daylight. The land seemed to sigh around them. In the weeks that followed, the camps grew quieter. Children laughed more easily. Hunters returned without fear. The old American plains stretched wide and forgiving. Hawk trained warriors not just for battle, but for guardianship. Morning Willow worked with elders from both sides, weaving understanding where mistrust once lived. Hawk of the Iron Plains remained a muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry, always shirtless, his fit, model-like muscular build, strong as ever. Yet his eyes changed. They held ease, purpose without pain. Morning Willow walked beside him in traditional Native clothing, her strength no longer carried alone. They did not rush their union. Love that survives trials learns patience. When they finally stood together before their people, it was not as a symbol, but as a promise that honor and love could walk the same path. Raven Speaker watched with quiet pride. Thunder Elk offered respect. The land accepted them both. Years later, stories would be told of a time when a vow was questioned and a heart was heard, of a warrior who learned that freedom is not the absence of duty, but the courage to choose what truly protects life. As the sun set over the plains, Hawk and Morning Willow stood side by side, hands joined, futures open. The wind moved through the grass like a blessing, and the land remembered them kindly.